Well, ever since October the 7th, we've seen these large Palestinian protests taking place in London and elsewhere. And indeed, on Friday night, I drove through Parliament Square to see another big protest. All the placards were up from the river to the sea, which we know is basically a genocidal taunt that says, get rid of the state of Israel and its people. But whenever I question this, whether it's on GB News or here on YouTube or anywhere else, I'm told, look, don't worry. It's just a small, vociferous minority. We don't have a bigger problem. And I thought, well, actually, you know what? Most people I know that are Muslims are getting on with their lives, getting on with their jobs, and are not going out on these protests. And I've wanted to believe that it was true, that it was just a minority of Muslims living in Britain that had these views. Well, the biggest story of the weekend, but you won't have spotted it because it's got so little coverage, almost zero on broadcast media and very little in the newspapers, is a result of some polling done by the reputable JL Partners for the Henry Jackson Society. What it reveals is something that I think is deeply, deeply disturbing. Only 25% of British Muslims believe that the murders, rapes and atrocities happened on October the 7th, despite all the global evidence of the incursion over the border, the paragliders going to that outdoor concert. Only 25% of British Muslims are prepared to accept that it's true. Perhaps even more disturbing is that nearly half, 46% of British Muslims have support and sympathy for Hamas. Well, let's think this through. Hamas is a prescribed terrorist organisation, and yet nearly half of British Muslims have strong sympathy with Hamas. A third of British Muslims want to see the imposition of Sharia law. That would be a completely new legal order in this country, and they would recognise that and not the established laws and courts of this country. And on cultural issues, only 28% of Muslims think it would be a bad thing if we outlawed homosexuality. Now, why am I so worried about this? Well, right now, there are about 4 million Muslim people living in Britain. And if a half of those, roughly, across all of those numbers, if a half of those subscribe to values and ideas, or even support organisations that we see as being an enemy of this country, who don't respect the police, don't respect the laws, don't respect the courts, we already have a massive problem. But looking ahead, the problem gets worse, because this 4 million is expected by 2050 to be well over 10 million. So how on earth do we live in a society where a significant and large minority have a completely different attitude, a completely different way of life, and no respect for what we would consider to be the norms? This probably is the most serious social problem this country has ever faced before. We face those on the outside who've been against our values, but never before have we faced a significant number of people living within the country who fundamentally want not to integrate with our society, but to change us to their way of living. And why are we here? Well, it's about time we told the truth on this. This project was started by Tony Blair, continued by Cameron, Johnson, and all of them. This is a result of indiscriminate mass immigration into Britain. This is a result of diversity. Peter Mandelson, Tony Blair, Alistair Campbell, all saying that diversity was a good thing of itself. Diversity only works, and is a good thing, if it's coupled with integration and basic shared common values. What their diversity has led to, cowardly backed up by the Conservative Party, is now a whole different group of people living within our country. And I put it to you, this is very, very scary. We're going to need somehow, before too long, to make it clear, whilst people are allowed to have their own rights of private religious observance, this is our country. We're not going to have anybody that moves here changing it.